All right, and I'm going to broadcast now to our the Progressive Dems of Orange County Facebook page. And hopefully we'll be ready to go. Let me switch to my speaker view. Okay, welcome everyone to our third candidate forum, this one for North Carolina Senate District 23 with Graig, Meyer, and Jamie DeMent Holcomb. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Rebecca Cerise. I'm the president of the Progressive Democrats of Orange County. Really excited about tonight, and our brand newly minted treasurer, Jen Sykes, is going to be our moderator for this forum, and I'll hand it over to her in 1 minute. Just wanted to make just a very few announcements. Again, we are broadcasting live on the Progressive Democrats of Orange County Facebook page. Also, we are recording this and we're going to put it up as soon as possible, probably tomorrow morning, if possible, onto our YouTube page as well. So that will be available for everyone. And the reason that's even more important is because we are going to be sending out our endorsement ballots tomorrow to our membership to vote on endorsements. In order to be able to vote in the endorsement, you have to be a member of our chapter and our state caucus. So the Progressive State Caucus and the Progressive Democrats of Orange County. And I'll put a bunch of links once I hand it over to Jen. I'll put a bunch of links in the chat that has all that information. Wanted to give a shout out for poll greeters. We are looking for poll greeters. The Democratic Party is looking for poll greeters for early voting. I'm going to share the Sign Up Genius links for all of the early voting sites and where you can find the voting. And so please, if you have time, we want to have poll greeters at every single one of our early voting sites. And early voting starts on April 28th. So make your voting plan, and that's same day registration, all during the early voting. So one-stop early voting, you can actually register there. And then of course, our election day is May 17th, which is very exciting, just around the corner. Yeah, and just not only vote, but help the candidates that are running. These are really important elections. You support someone, go knock on doors for them. We'll be announcing our progressive slate hopefully Monday. And so please do support our slate of candidates. I think that is all I was going to say. And I'll start putting some of the links that I was talking about into the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. And welcome everyone to our Senate District 23 candidate forum. We have two candidates on the Democratic primary ballot tonight, Jamie DeMent Holcomb and Graig, Meyer. And the way this is going to work is we're going to allow them to have a 3-minute opening statement. And then I'll go through a series of questions. Each candidate will have about 2 to 3 minutes to respond, maybe an extra minute for any follow-up questions for clarification, not necessarily rebuttals. We want to keep this so that the candidates can propose their positions and help us understand where they stand on issues that are important to progressives, and then do a closer at the end for about a minute. So I used an app on the internet that did a coin flip and assigned Ms. DeMent Holcomb and Representative Meyer 2 heads and tails, and Jamie, you came up on top. So would you like to take the opener first or do the closer first?
I can do the opener first.
All right,
I like
so
the technology coin flip. I love that.
Yep, just you go online and it tells you how to do things. And so that means, Graig, you'll have you'll go first for the closing. And so let's get started. So I've got a timer on my cell phone. So Ms. DeMent Holcomb, feel free to start with your opening statement for about 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me here. I'm really glad to see so many familiar faces, including some family here. So that's really nice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jamie DeMint Holcomb. I'm a wife, a mother, an organic farmer, a writer, an entrepreneur, and an early childhood education advocate in my role as executive director of Kidzu Children's Museum in Chapel Hill. I've been lucky to meet many of you through selling produce from my farm, or even thanking some of you for being volunteers at Kidzu. I'm a lifelong North Carolinian. I'm from Franklin County, an area to the east of here that's not that different from the northern part of this district in Person and Caswell counties. I'm 100% a product of North Carolina public schools, from kindergarten through postgraduate work at UNC. I come from a long line of public servants. My mother taught public school for more than 30 years, and my father and grandfathers were first responders, and all of my grandparents, and even my great-grandmother, who I had with me until I was 21 years old, were involved with our local governments in many different ways. My family owned the farm supply for the county where I was from. It was the oldest business in our county, and growing up, I saw firsthand how many of our rural communities were left behind as our traditional economy collapsed. As a kid, seeing my town and my community deteriorate, I was pretty sure that the only way to succeed was to get out. So that's what I did. I went to UNC as a Morehead Scholar. I traveled the world. I went to work on Capitol Hill as a legislative aide for Congressman Brad Miller. And then after several years, I felt called back to North Carolina, where I eventually met my husband right after he'd bought a farm in Hillsborough that we thought initially would be a weekend getaway. But pretty quickly, we decided that we had to put our money where our mouths were, and we left our jobs to commit full time to sustainable farming. We've worked 18 years to promote healthy, sustainable living and farming across Orange County in North Carolina. And recently, actually exactly 6 months ago today, after raising 4 stepchildren, I became a mother myself. So happy 6th birthday to Mary Ritchie. You may hear her in the background. That's the main reason I'm here today. I'm running because I want to build a brighter future for Mary Ritchie. I'm running because I want her to grow up in a world where women in public office are everywhere instead of being a minority. I believe that when women bring their unique perspectives and life experiences to offices, that our policies improve. Electing women means having leaders who know personally the importance of issues like Medicaid expansion and equitable access to healthcare, pre-K education, equal pay, abortion rights, and guaranteed paid parental leave for all parents, regardless of how they made their family. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Lillian's List and Congressman Brad Miller, who I used to work for. Lillian's List, we had our big kickoff last night. It's an organization that has been on the front lines of supporting women candidates in North Carolina across the decades. This
Jamie,
district,
you are at time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for moderating. Progressive Dems of Orange County. Thanks for hosting. It's good to see many friends here. I am Graig Meyer. I've been state representative for House District 50 for the last 8+ years, and would love to have your support to be the next senator for Senate District 23, to step up and fight for all the values that we share in this community and that we need for the good of North Carolina. I just came from being with President Biden and Governor Cooper in Greensboro, and still have a little bit of the adrenaline from being in that environment and thinking about what are the big, bold ideas that we can do to make this place better for all people. And we had great conversations today, mostly about manufacturing and infrastructure and the green energy future, about multimodal transportation and about electrification, all kinds of things at that meeting. But today was also a typical day in a legislator for me, where I had conversations with folks today. I wrote down a list about cannabis reform, about electing Democrats across the state, about affordable housing, about multimodal transportation, about funding Leandro, about the Orange County School Board race, about our courts races, about reproductive rights, and about fighting the history of systemic racism against Black farmers across North Carolina. So in any day of a legislator, we deal with so many issues, and today was no different in taking up all of those things. I based my career in public service in the public schools, and I started by being a social worker in schools. and trying to help students be the first in their family to go to college. And when I think about who I am now, I still think about how do I approach public service through the things that I learned when I was trying to serve those students and help them and their families navigate the education system and all the systems around them. That you have to listen, you have to understand who people are, believe them and support them, find out where there's common interests that you can unite around and work together, and then lead with bold ideas. When I ran the Blue Ribbon Mentoring Program for the Chapel Hill schools, we set a goal of having every kid that we work with graduate and go on to post-secondary education. We came really close. 97.5% of our kids graduated from high school, 100% of those kids enrolled in post-secondary education. I believe we are capable of big things when we have strong leadership, and that's why I continue to run to represent Orange County, Person County, Caswell County, and all North Carolinians in the North Carolina Senate.
All right, thank you, Representative Meyer. We will now go to our first question. And I think for the questions, what I'll do is have one of you start and rotate that way through the questions. We've got 7, but we will also take questions from the audience. Feel free to put them in the chat box. Throughout these candidate forums, we've had some great questions come in through the audience that we've used to help close out the meeting. So again, the questions, about 2 to 3 minutes for a response, and an extra if something needs clarification. All right, so the first question, and I will start this one, I guess, alternating format with Representative Meyer. What would be your top 2 policy priorities in the General Assembly? And what would be your approach to making headway on those priorities?
So because I came from education, education has always been where I've started with my legislative work. And I believe that we still need a strong public education system from early childhood through career education for North Carolina to have a strong economy and a strong democracy. And our biggest challenge in front of us right now is how do we fully fund our public school system as required by the Leandro court case and our Constitution. And I've been working actively with the Every Child NC Coalition and multiple other legislators on what is our approach to trying to make sure that we do increase our funding to meet the Leandro mandate. We are, of course, hopeful that the courts will support that, but we have to do work on the legislative side. And we are working on how do we look at the Leandro, at the individual elements of Leandro and figure out where we have opportunities to get funding for those, even from a Republican led legislature that does not want to use the word Leandro, even if we can get them to increase some funding. My other second biggest priority is going to be climate and how many things come through the climate lens. We made some progress last year in addressing our climate challenge in the energy sector. We have to take on the transportation sector and we have to take on the ag sector. And there are ways to do all of these things that help our economy and address climate challenges at the same time, as long as we are bold and proactive and thinking ahead. And that's part of what was exciting about today's conversations and what's happening in the state with offshore wind coming to North Carolina next month. With the sale of our offshore wind areas coming on board, and with the huge advances that we're making in technology. But we also have to take on things like increasing multimodal transportation, public transportation access. Had a great meeting yesterday about commuter rail and about how to use that in the state. And the effort just to overall reduce the total amount of vehicle miles traveled to reduce our emissions. There's so many things that could go on and on about what we need to do on climate.
All right, thank you, Representative Meyer. Ms. DeMint Holcomb, your top 2 priorities and what would be your approach to making headway on them?
So I'd say, like, with equal emphasis on both of these priorities, I'd like to start with Medicaid expansion. I think it's one of the issues in North Carolina right now that we can really see bipartisan support for. It would give healthcare access, equitable healthcare access to more than 500,000 North Carolinians. It would create jobs in rural communities in North Carolina. And, it would lead to more healthy citizenry, which is one of the things that I think is is kind of one of our mandates as society is to take care of one another. And I do absolutely believe it's one of those things that you can get people to cross the aisle over. We can look to other states that have that have done it and have been successful. And they're looking at, I mean, it's not just a healthier state, it's a state with a higher tax base and people with more jobs. So I think that if we work across the aisle and kind of are creative in our arguments about what we need to do to get it passed, then I my guess is that it gets passed before I could end up in the legislature. I have honestly great confidence in in Graig and the members of the legislature right now, because I think everyone is working really hard on it. But I think it's a very high priority. And public education is, I think, absolutely one of the things that we need to focus on as a state. This county is an excellent example of the disparity and equitable access to public education in North Carolina. You look at, when you compare Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Orange County schools to schools in Person and Caswell counties, and you look at the resources that are allocated, whether it's the actual facilities that people are going to school with, or the books that they have access to, or the resources that the teachers have, or, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it's just simply not equitably spread across the state. And I think I would love to see every single aspect of Leandro funded and enforced across the state. I think it is, I think there's a big chance that the courts shut it down. And I think that we have to start looking at other ways to get bipartisan support for equitable education funding. And some of that may be reaching out to Republican rural members and saying, look at the resources that people in Wake County and Mecklenburg County and Orange County have. Don't you want the students in your county to have access to the exact same things? Help us fund it. Help us get this across the line.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ms. Mint Holcomb. All right. The next question, we'll start with you again. And it is, why do you want to serve in the state Senate? It's something that's controlled by the GOP. The General Assembly in North Carolina is a part-time position. It doesn't pay terribly well. You have to commute to Raleigh and deal with that nightmarish traffic on 40. Just saying this as a working commuter. So what's your motivation for wanting to do this? And how do you feel you can be an effective member of this body if elected?
So first, I will say, hopefully we will have better mass transit options in the coming years so that commute won't be so bad. And maybe I could, drive to a station over near like Durham Tech Community College in Hillsborough, and I could park my car there and I could hop on a train that might take me into downtown Raleigh. I think that'd be really great. I want to do this job because I've always wanted to serve. As I said earlier, I grew up in a family of public servants, of people who absolutely believed that you have to give back, that we live in a world that is, a fantastic and free society. That, American democracy may have its troubles, but it's a hell of a lot better than what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine right now. And I believe that as a citizen of North Carolina and the United States, I should give back. And I've done that my whole life, whether it's, trying to volunteer in my community or starting an organic farm where I literally every single day improve the world directly around me, where I'm raising produce that's actually healing the soil. So I think this is just a next step in that trajectory of trying to give back. And why state Senate? It was, I was recruited to run for the seat when David Price announced his retirement and Senator Fushi announced that she was going to run. Folks reached out to me and asked me to run, and I said, absolutely, I accept the call. I would love to serve Orange, Person, and Caswell counties in the state of North Carolina, and I hope to have the opportunity to do that.
And I'm just going to add for follow-up, if you would clarify on who, when you talk about people recruiting you, what kind of interests are involved in that? Is there a specific group? And I think we got a little bit on
current members of the state Senate and members and other people that were members of the Democratic Party and other elected officials were part of who reached out to me. There's a robust group of female elected officials who have ties to groups like Lillian's List and Emily's List, who work very, very hard to recruit candidates for races like this, because women make up over 50% of the electorate, and only, in North Carolina, about 25% of the elected officials are women. And we're working incredibly hard to make sure that we see more women in elected roles. I mean, as Greg said, when David Price retired, it's time to see more women in office. And I wholeheartedly agree with him, and the folks that recruited me agreed as well.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Representative Meyer, same question to you. The condensed version and not my complaint about my morning commute. Why do you want to serve in the state Senate, and how do you feel you can be an effective member of the body?
You know, Jen, you said that why would you want to do this when it's a GOP controlled body? And let's make sure that it's not always a GOP controlled body. I mean, part of the reason why I continue to stay in politics is because I have taken on the role the entire time that I've been in the legislature of being one of the Democrats who works to move the entire team forward. Over my 8 years in the House, my campaign has raised and donated to the House Democratic Caucus or other Democratic candidates over $1 million. And that's thanks to many of you who are on this call who understand that we have a job to do to try and make sure that we have a Democratic majority. And that Democratic majority could be no place more important than in the North Carolina Senate, where you have a chamber that is run by Mark Robinson and Phil Berger, two of probably the most difficult, could use worse words for them, Republicans that we have in the state. I'm ready to go and take them on head to head where we need to. And I have the knowledge and experience to work on deals where the deals are possible. We are working on Medicaid expansion. We're working on cannabis legalization. We're working on mental health expansion, on broadband expansion, all of those issues across the aisle. And when those deals get done, the Senate has always and will always be a place where the biggest part of the deals get done. And I want to be one of the leaders who's helping us push for the boldest of possible ideas while we're working on these critically important issues that will be in front of us over the next few years.
All right, thank you, Representative Meyer. And you will actually start the next question, which ties into a piece of your answer. Part of why the State House is controlled by the opposite party is due to attempts to limit enfranchisement and gerrymander the districts. What would you do in the state Senate to prevent further erosions of democracy with respect to voting rights and gerrymandering?
I mean, I've been on the forefront of this issue the entire time that I've been in the legislature. I have committed to ending partisan gerrymandering once and for all by creating an independent redistricting approach, probably through constitutional amendment and then an enactment of that amendment. That's what I would prefer. And when I was the chair of the House Caucus Campaign Committee in the 2020 election, I made sure that every Democrat running for State House statewide committed to that pledge so that it wasn't about partisan politics any longer. It was about us moving beyond that to independent redistricting. On the voting rights front, I've worked on those issues as well throughout my time in the legislature. When the North Carolina constitutional amendment on voter ID was enacted, I was the lead person on writing what our bill was to respond to that, to try to make sure that no one would lose their access to voting from the voter ID requirement. Hopefully the courts end that for us and we don't have to take that up in legislation. But I've worked on that issue. And then the other issue that I've worked on over the last couple of years is universal voter access, trying to make sure that we have a system where everyone who is eligible to vote can vote in North Carolina, including legislation that I've introduced that would allow same-day registration on election day and the pre-registration of people as young as 16 so that they make sure that they're registered to vote when they become officially eligible and can vote at age 18. Because we want them to be voting as quickly, as soon as possible. There are going to be continued fights on voting rights in the North Carolina General Assembly, and that is probably the #1 reason why we need to continue to have the ability to support vetoes by Governor Cooper and to elect another Democratic governor and to be able to support their vetoes if we don't have a majority, and while continue to work to elect Democrats all across the state And then we'll continue to try and work to elect Democrats to the courts as well to make sure that they can protect us from unconstitutional attacks on our voting rights.
Great. Thank you, Representative Meyer. Mr. Mint Holcomb, same question. What do you plan to do to support voting rights and enfranchisement?
I mean, I would, to be very honest, echo nearly everything Greg said on that front. I mean, I I think that we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the gerrymandering stops across North Carolina and honestly in every state in the nation. That likely requires constitutional amendments. It's not something that we can just, that we can mandate, because unfortunately both parties have gerrymandered. When the Democrats were in power, we did it. The Republicans are in power, they do it, and it's not honest access to democracy. So I would push for constitutional amendments that solidify nonpartisan, independent redistricting committees, because it's the only way that things are absolutely fair.
And just as a follow-up, is there anything about voting rights you would do to work through that?
I absolutely support open access to polls. I think that historically in North Carolina and across the Southeast, there've been absolutely criminal acts that have prevented people from getting to the polls, and we are seeing movements across the nation of enacting laws to keep people away. And I think that we have to do everything we can to fight those laws. And in some cases, as Representative Meyer said, we have to lean on the governor to veto, and then do everything we can to support the veto and to keep enough Democrats in the state Senate. That there's 22 now. We've got to preserve that 22 and hopefully gain a couple of seats, if at all humanly possible, so that we can make sure that we protect rights across the state.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Holcomb, because your answer on voting rights sort of feeds into the next question. A driver for the attack on democracy by the state GOP is also a restriction of rights and recognitions for communities of color, the LGBTQ plus community, and other underrepresented populations. What are your approaches to ensuring these communities are represented and have their rights protected moving forward?
I think the first step there is bringing all of those communities into the process. I think that uplifting those communities through asking for active participation, through making sure that there are open doors and open avenues for dialogue, for making sure that all of those communities are brought to the communal table so that everyone's voices is heard. I mean, part of your job as a public servant and as an elected official is having an open door, but also going a step further and reaching out to those communities, going into those communities and asking what their issues are, not just assuming, not saying, oh, I think this will help you. It's asking questions and truly listening, and not just saying, okay, you want more housing, or you want mental health workers in your communities, or you want this. It's saying, well, if you want that, how do we get it? What do you think is the roadmap to getting there? And what do you think are the resources that we need to build into every single bill that we introduce in the state Senate or the state House to make sure that your issue is heard? And I also think we need to lift up members in every single one of those communities and do everything that we can as a party to make sure that members of those communities are being elected, so that every single one of those marginalized communities has a voice at an elected level. And some of that is recruitment. Some of that is it may be some of us stepping aside and saying, this is your moment to shine. You take this role. So I would like to do everything in my power, obviously, to make sure that I'm listening and to make sure that I'm truly hearing the issues, and that I'm taking action steps that actually match what I'm being asked to do.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Mint Holcomb. Representative Meyer, same question to you. What will you do to protect underrepresented communities?
So I was very proud today to get the endorsement of North Carolina Asian Americans Together. And after a couple of years of dialogue with that organization about how to support their goals, I'm proud to have the endorsement of Equality North Carolina after many years of working with them, including being their legislator of the year, right after we did the repeal of House Bill 2, which maybe is where I should actually answer this question, is to talk about it in terms of what happened then. When House Bill 2 happened, was kind of my first moment in the media sun, because I was using social media to live broadcast basically what was happening that day and how terrible it was. And then ended up working consistently on that issue until we got to the point where we had a possible and partial repeal in front of us. And I was working with Equality, and I was working with the Human Rights Campaign, and I was working with local advocates like Lydia Lavelle and I were on the phone all the time about how this impacted the locals' ability to regulate non-discrimination. And then finally, when we got to the point where there was a deal in front of us to do a repeal, it still left in place a prohibition on local non-discrimination ordinances. And Governor Cooper had negotiated the deal. He was brand new in the job, and he had all of the legislators over to the executive mansion to ask for us to support the deal he negotiated. And I wasn't clear that I wanted to support the deal that he negotiated when it still left in place a prohibition on local non-discrimination ordinances. And the governor came up to me at the end of that meeting that we had, and he said, "Greg, I hope you're going to be able to support me on this." And I looked him in the eye and I said, "Governor, I can't. I don't think this is the right thing, and I don't think I can be with you on this today." And I voted against that because it still left in place a prohibition on non-discrimination. It allowed discrimination to remain in law, and I just didn't feel like I could justify that to my community nor to my children. And now looking back on that 4 years later, although it was difficult to tell our newly elected governor that, I feel like that was the right thing to do. I built my career by working with African American and Latino families in Chapel Hill and trying to understand how to help people who are marginalized and left out to have access to the opportunity and the power that they need. And that's what still drives me to be in elected service today. Why I still talk to my former students and their families about what they need and what's happening in their lives. And I think, I have always, as I said, focused on that you have to listen first, find out what people are looking for, and then use bold leadership to give them access to the power and opportunity they need.
Thank you, Representative Meyer, right on the 3-minute mark. If I think for both Mr. Min Holcomb and Representative Meyer, when you get to the 5-second mark, I start putting my hand up if you can see this, if you've got your Zoom configured that way. All right, and our next one, we'll start with you, Representative Meyer. This has sort of been hit on a bit. The 23rd district covers an extremely rural part of North Carolina and a suburban community with ties to the Triangle. As a result, different parts of the district face different problems. What do you think is the most pressing problem that affects both parts of the district or all of the district? And what are the 2 problems that are unique to the different parts of the district?
I love this district. I mean, it's been really fascinating to represent Orange County and Caswell County for the last 4 years. And before that, it was Orange and Durham, which wasn't as dissimilar as Orange and Caswell. Orange County is the most highly educated county in the state. Caswell County is number 91 out of 100. And yet education, I think, is the number one thing that connects them, because here we have this huge value that we place on education. We value the university. We have had huge investments in early childhood education. We have 2 of the most highly performing school systems in the state. And in Caswell County, we have persistent problems with just having high literacy levels and a school system that can barely afford to give its teachers a supplement. They get a $300 a year supplement, nowhere near what we pay to teachers in Chapel Hill or Orange County schools. And the folks in Caswell County want as good of schools as they can have for their children as the people here in Orange County do. My first year of campaigning in Caswell County, there was a school bond referendum on the ballot. And in a county that is more Republican than Democrat and certainly more poor than rich, 70% of people voted for that bond. They are willing to fund their schools and to support education for their children. So that's definitely the biggest uniter. The biggest difference is rural broadband access, which isn't just about the county differences, it's really about the regional difference, because here in Orange County, we have rural broadband challenges outside of Chapel Hill and Carrboro. And rural broadband is, of course, such a huge issue because it impacts your ability to work, it impacts your education, it impacts your ability to have access to healthcare, et cetera. And I didn't even know that we had a rural broadband access when I first got into office, but over my time in office, I've probably put more time into that issue than any other issue. And Caswell County right now has major investments being made through state and federal grants to get broadband to about 2/3 of its residents, hopefully within the next 2 years. And Orange County has some plans that are underway to get broadband to all of our residents, hopefully quickly, that I think you'll be hearing a lot about soon. And I feel like if I have been able to contribute to that effort to address rural broadband, it probably will have been one of the most important things that I've done in my time.
All right, thank you, Representative Meyer. Ms. Holcomb, same question. What unites and what divides the district in terms of policy priorities? You're on mute, Jamie. Let me restart the clock.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there was a screaming baby and I was trying to control the volume.
I'm just very grateful my dog has not started barking yet.
Yeah,
during this.
it's bottle time. Thank God I have a supportive husband who is sprinting behind the computer with a warm bottle in his hand. The issue that unites, I think, all North Carolina counties right now is public education, and as Representative Meyer said, it is covering those gaps from and I mean it's what I said earlier tonight. It's making the difference between these super high performing and high resource districts and the districts that have so much less. And then the things I think where I think the most, I can fill in there if you want me to, but I've already talked about the divide between rural and more urban education areas. I don't think y'all want to hear me go there again. Where I think that one of the greatest divides in the entire state is, and it is perfectly kind of, the light is shown on it in this district is the difference in access to good medical care. I experienced it growing up. I was born with a really unusual birth defect that kind of looks like fetal spina bifida, but I can't feel my hands. I was born without any feeling in my hands, and I spent 18 years going back and forth from Franklin County to Chapel Hill to see neurologists because we didn't have doctors in Franklin County who could handle the very specific issues that I had, and I needed very specialized care. And that's playing out every single day in Caswell County and Person County. Especially in Caswell County, you've got residents who are crossing state lines because they don't have access to decent doctors in Caswell County. They're going into Danville, Virginia to get to doctors and get to a hospital and to, even get to an urgent care. And that doesn't happen in Orange County. I mean, you can get to UNC and UNC Health clinics with relative ease, even if you're in Northern Orange. Certainly there's areas of Northern Orange that don't have healthcare as easily accessible. But when you look at Person and Caswell counties, the lack of adequate access to healthcare is appalling, and that's something that we've got to do better on. And some of that is state funding, some of that might be that we need to urge for more federal funding, but we've got to do better on getting healthcare to all of our citizens.
All right, thank you very much. Our next question will go to you, Mr. Holcomb, as well, and this one will involve everybody's favorite subject that we hoped was going to resolve itself, but the COVID pandemic has actually raised a number of issues around equity. What do you think is the biggest policy change that needs to come in response to the pandemic, and how do you plan to work to fix that problem and adjust that policy to create a more equal post-COVID world?
My last answer kind of plays into this one a little bit. I mean, I think that COVID has kind of like ripped back the covers and shown all of the ugly parts of society. It's showing where we're falling down at every level. It's, it's showing where the rural broadband is missing because the kids that were in virtual school are not getting access to their school teachers and to the lessons that they need. It's, it's also shown a glaring light on our healthcare system and how we are not equitably allocating resources at every level. I mean, if we did a better job at preventative healthcare, if we made universal healthcare accessible across our state to every single citizen, we could have probably more quickly distributed vaccines. We may have been able to more equitably and fairly explained the vaccination process to communities where there's vaccine hesitancy. You know, I feel like there's so many things we could have done. And I, you know, as a member of the General Assembly, I would like to reach out to doctors, to community leaders, to mental health workers, and say, you know, how do we all come together to work on these solutions together? I mean, I don't honestly, I'm not an elected official yet. I don't know exactly, you know, what I would do and what bill I would sponsor, but I would like to think that there's community, there's many members of the community who could come together to work to create better access, and that just in general as a party and as a state, that we could, you know, work to get universal health care across the line.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Representative Meyer, question to you.
I was just thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic, how scary it was, how little information we had, how our systems weren't prepared for the initial stages of it. And I'm very grateful that we had strong leadership in North Carolina. I think Governor Cooper's leadership and Mandy Cohen, DHHS, led us through the worst of the public health parts of a pandemic in pretty strong form. And then we did respond very well economically. We had strong budget years and we took care of small businesses. I've helped dozens of small businesses get access to economic support. And we had a pretty good unemployment response, and our office helped dozens and dozens of folks with that. So here we are now, and we still obviously have to deal with the ongoing impact of what does it mean to live with COVID. But when you think about what do we learn from that, where do we go from there? I think equity is the right lens, the one you used of what do we need here, because we did see how important it was that we had to get access to broadband everywhere so that people had access to education and healthcare and opportunity. I think we did see the way that all medical conditions seemingly impact communities of color and low-income communities more than they impact wealthy communities and predominantly white communities. And what really impacts me the most is what happened to our kids. What happened to my kids? My 7-year-old who just took off her mask in school this week for the first time in her experience in starting kindergarten. And what did she experience and lose from that? Or my senior in high school, of going through the majority of his high school career in that way. And honestly, like, he's not entirely socially prepared for college. I'm ready for him to go to college, but he's been hurt by the last couple of years. We have an adolescent mental health crisis because of the pandemic. And we have teachers who have had a more difficult year this year and who are stressed out. What we need for our schools is we need a moment, an extended moment of love and caring. In my work, I'm an educational consultant. I've been working with teachers all over the country on this. And what I tell them is we have to reconnect. We have to take care of our children by loving them and ensuring that their basic needs of feeling safe and healthy and supported and cared and touched and emotionally addressed, all of those things need to be taken care of. I wish the schools would slow down on trying to push on our testing standards right now and just make sure the kids are okay and connected. And in order to do all of that well through the future, we need more social workers and more counselors and more school psychologists who can take care of kids' mental health needs and make sure that they are ready to learn. And we need to make sure that our teachers are not neglected and don't burn out through the midst of this.
Thank you, Representative Meyer. All right. So from that, there have been some audience questions that tie in with some of the points you've raised at this point. One that's come in that I know when I was writing this question out, it was actually the topic I would have answered this question with myself, but what will you do to help support housing security? We are in not just an affordable housing crisis, an overall housing supply crisis, particularly in this area. A new study came out. I think the news today said we're now one of the highest priced areas in the country. We are slowly morphing into San Francisco. So what are some of the approaches you would have to help support housing security in the in the state legislature, in the General Assembly? And because of the way we're doing the orders, we'll start with Representative Meyer and then go to Mr. Mint Holcomb.
It's kind of astounding that in the 8 years I've been in the legislature, we haven't done a single bill on affordable housing, not any piece of legislation. But the reason why is because since I've been in under a Republican-controlled legislature, in most of their counties, they've not had affordable housing challenges because they mostly represent rural North Carolina. Well, that's changing. Now, when I talk to my colleagues who represent counties like Person County, where we're running, or like Johnston County, or Harnett County, or Cabarrus County, or Union County, counties that haven't had affordable housing challenges, all of a sudden they do, just like we have for a long time in Orange County or in the Triangle. And so the tide is shifting in Raleigh about what's possible on affordable housing. I think that we are going to see some investments in public funding for affordable housing, which is one aspect of what we have to do just to make sure that people have access to housing. I think that will start slowly and we'll have to continue pressure on that. There's another area that I've been working on over the last couple of weeks with the North Carolina Justice Center and with Orange County leaders, which is what do we do about mobile home parks? When I worked in Chapel Hill schools, I was amazed to learn that in the Chapel Hill School District, we had 17 mobile home parks just in the Chapel Hill Carrboro City schools. And because I worked with kids from families that lived in those communities, I ended up spending time in all of them. And so then when I ran for this seat, I wanted to know how many do we have in Orange County? And we have 99 mobile home parks. I had no idea. Most of them are hidden. You can't see them from the road. And the 99 mobile home parks are all between 40 and 60 years old. And that is basically the lifespan of a mobile home park, which means those are going to close. And the people who own those parks are generally owned by a family, are generally aging out of it. What are we going to do with that land? What are we going to do for those people? What are we going to do to make sure that we can keep the people in houses, whether it's on that land or somewhere else? There are models that are amazing. Like in Virginia, they have a model where they put affordable housing on mobile home park lands and give the first right to buy into the people who live there. There are other states who, when a mobile home park is going to sell, the tenants have the first right to buy it. And we're looking at putting that into some proposed legislation here. And the Orange County commissioners and some of our local advocates have taken on a project to look at a whole entire plan for what do we do around mobile home parks. And on top of all that, we have to figure out how to make sure that the overall cost of housing remains at a point where people don't have to pay more than about 1/3 of their monthly income for housing. So that means we have to keep people's incomes up and keep the cost of housing down. Right now, one of the things that I've been working on the cost of housing is how do we increase the supply of skilled labor. My time's up.
Yep. Thank you, Representative. Thanks, Representative Meyer. All right, Ms. Mint Holcomb, same question to you. Thoughts on housing affordability and security?
Yeah, thank you. In general, I think when you look at the history of North Carolina's support for equitable housing, it's deplorable. North Carolina in general historically is a relatively progressive state, but not when it comes to supporting housing. So obviously, I would like to see more support coming from the legislature and the governor for any housing initiatives just to make it more equitable. But I think that one of the things that we can do more quickly is to support initiatives like the work that Habitat is doing, especially public-private partnerships like the one that they are doing in Chapel Hill at Weaver's Grove, where you're bringing multiple players to the table, and you've got a nonprofit with a long storied history of supporting equitable housing, and then you've got business interests coming in who can help with the heavy lifting of getting everything built, and then you're offering accessible housing, and I think that in the short term, looking at more opportunities like that, and talking to municipalities across the state and showing them this model and helping them maybe relook at their zoning issues and be more open-minded about developments like that. I think that if as a state that we can put support behind those initiatives, then we might move the ball of better housing down the field a little faster while the state catches up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mint Holcomb. And our next question is again from the audience. And we'll start with you, Mr. Mint Holcomb. And I'll phrase it this way. The question's about generally what are some of your healthcare priorities? Both of you have spoken about different healthcare issues that are impacted by state government. Beyond Medicaid expansion, I think both of you have said that one. What would you say are your next 3 health priorities for state healthcare?
I mean, as I said in, I think my last answer, the one before that, universal access to healthcare, yeah, I would say is a number one priority. Equitable access. I mean, making sure. I said this just a few minutes ago. Making sure that all counties have access to doctors' offices and clinics, and that they're not having to drive hours. I mean, many of our citizens don't have the resources and the opportunity to load a family member in the car and drive 3 hours and sit and wait in a waiting room all day, and maybe in some cases not even be seen by the doctor, and then drive all the way home. I mean, that's just not something that people can do. So we need to make sure that all of our counties have doctors and doctors' offices and access to the resources that they need. And obviously we're not going to be able to build a UNC level hospital in every single county, but we at least need to have accessible clinics, pharmacies, physicians assistants, so that the basic healthcare needs can be met.
All right, thank you, Ms. Holcomb. Representative Meyer, what are your top 3 health priorities?
I have not been asked a question about healthcare priorities beyond Medicaid expansion in years, so this is great. I really appreciate this question. Number 1, reproductive healthcare access. Given the likelihood that Roe is going to fall at the U.S. Supreme Court level, and that issue is going to come to the states, it is something that we have to be prepared for. We have been able to block all the Republicans' bad abortion bills and sustain Governor Cooper's vetoes on those, and we need to continue to do that. And maybe with a Democratic majority, even guarantee reproductive health care access. I'm very proud to have the endorsements of Planned Parenthood and Pro-Choice North Carolina because of the work that I've done with them on this issue in my time in the General Assembly. Second issue, something I've been working on actively with Jay Chaudhary from the Senate and with Attorney General Stein, is access to medical cannabis. I do think we're going to pass a medical cannabis bill this year. Senator Stein and I were the primary sponsors of the Marijuana Justice Reinvestment Act. He did it in the Senate, I did it in the House. And that is a bill that would fully legalize marijuana, allow us to tax it, regulate it, and reinvest the money in the communities that were the most hurt by the war on drugs. But we're probably not going to get to full legalization this year, but we are going to get to medical, and we need to make sure that it's done right, that North Carolinians have the ability to prosper off of a cannabis industry and to have access to medical cannabis just as easily as they have access to any other prescription drug. And then the third issue is always going to be the affordability of healthcare. Medicaid expansion is a huge part of that because it will probably reduce people's premiums by about 7% just by doing that. But the other legislation that we can do on affordability of healthcare would largely, the easy stuff would be around prescription drug costs, including insulin, which we've been talking about a lot in public recently, which President Biden spoke about today. But if we can just bring down people's out-of-pocket expenses on what they spend on drugs, it would make a huge difference to so many North Carolinians.
All right, thank you, Representative Meyer. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll go through one more question, and I'm going to combine one I had with one from the audience. What do you think it means to be a progressive? And do you identify as one? What have you done to promote progressive policies, and how would you be committed to engaging with progressive constituencies in all your constituencies if elected? And I think we start with Representative Meyer on that one.
I mean, progressive to me means being bold. Progressive means trying to hold out what we really believe is best for people. Progressive means thinking about the people who, as I said earlier, are the most marginalized. Progressive means choosing to focus on families instead of corporations. Progressive means creating policies that are focused on prosperity from the bottom up. Progressive means coming up with public policy solutions that reinvest in communities. Progressive means having tax policy that rewards people who work the hardest and make sure that everyone pays their fair share. Progressive, I think, it is everything that I have tried to do in any of the legislation that I have introduced, which is why a lot of the legislation that I've introduced hasn't passed. And I also believe in being someone who takes the victory when it's in front of you and being able to negotiate to a deal that makes life better for people and being able to find the opportunities to advance what people need in the way that we have on, for instance, House Bill 951 last year. Pricey Harrison and I were the prime House negotiators on this giant energy bill that Duke Energy was pushing, and we thought we could maybe get a deal in the House, and we didn't, because we held out progressive ideals. We weren't willing to cave to Duke Energy and their money. And the best we could do in the House was to make sure that the bill left the House in a bad enough condition that Governor Cooper was going to veto it, and that we knew we had a veto-proof, veto-sustaining majority, including 9 Republicans who were with us, and how bad the bill was. And then it went to the Senate and then got negotiated into a much better bill, and one that I was proud to vote for because it commits North Carolina to net neutrality and carbon emissions. It wasn't the best bill. It lacked a whole bunch of supports that we tried to negotiate for keeping energy affordable for low-income North Carolinians, which means I don't think of it as a progressive bill, but I was willing to vote for something that was progress and it was going to help us overall. And that's the way that I approach trying to be a progressive legislator who does get things done.
And the follow-up question, Representative Meyer, part of that question is, how will you engage with citizens, this progressive caucus as well, to make sure they're informed of what you're up to?
I appreciate your question in the chat, Miriam. I saw that one. I think you've asked me that at multiple forums in the past. I try I read all of my emails. I respond to people on social media. I call people back who ask for a telephone call. I show up at community meetings when I'm asked, and I have deep community relationships. Having worked in this community, in the public schools for so long, and now having been in office, I feel like the hundreds and hundreds of people that I know, who I see, who call me, who stay in touch with me, have the ability to influence me all the time, and I'm always listening to those people. And if you're on this Zoom and you feel like I haven't done that for you, then I'd be happy to talk to you about it and listen to you and what you think I can do better. And if there's something that, say, the Progressive Dems want as an organization in terms of having a formal relationship of how often do we connect, how do we communicate around specific pieces of legislation, any of those things, it's my job to represent you. And if there's ways that I can do it better, I'd love to hear what you think I can do.
Thank you, Representative Meyer. Ms. DeMint-Holcomb, same questions to you. Do you identify as progressive, and how will you support and inform the Progressive Caucus?
Yes, ma'am. I absolutely identify as progressive. I think in general, progressive means that we all believe that we, kind of inherently need to contribute to the greater good, that we all need to work together for a better and brighter society, that we need to lift each other up, that we need to take care of one another, educate one another, make sure that we are all well and cared for, and that well and cared for means everything from that we are not physically ill, but also that our mental health is being supported, and that all of that needs to come from our state and federal governments, and hopefully that it's led from the bottom up rather than being rained down on us from the top, and that it's something that we're working together as a populace to create, and that it's something where all voices are welcome and all voices are heard, which kind of contributes to the how will I keep my constituents informed, and how will I hear them, which if you have a policy that all voices and all people are welcome at the table, then that means that all of those voices should be heard. As an individual representative, I think that it's great when members send out weekly emails, when they are regularly active in social media. I think, as Greg said, you've got to answer the phone, you've got to answer those emails, you've got to respond to the social media comments, whether you like them or not. I mean, maybe not the scary trolling ones, but when there is constructive engagement that leads to to real outcomes, you have to be open and you have to be engaged, and you have to be a part of of all the community organizations that welcome you and that invite you in. If there are meetings that I need to attend, community events, birthday parties, ice cream socials, whatever they are, I need to be a part of them, and all candidates and members need to be a part of them. And when you're there, it's not just about eating ice cream and kissing babies, though that is the fun part. You need to converse with people while you're there. You need to engage, and you need to hear their stories and hear their concerns, and take what's on their hearts with you, and use that to inform any decisions you make about any legislative policy.
All right, thank you, Mr. Holcomb. And that wraps our questions. I haven't had any more sent through to me. So what we'll do now is do about a minute or two for closing statements. Since you went first with the opener, Ms. Holcomb, I think Representative Meyer, you get to go first on the closer, and Jamie will bookend us.
Well, thank you for moderating, Jen. Thank you, Rebecca, for doing all the hard work to set this up. Thanks for all the progressive Dems for running this entire series of forums and keeping the community informed. I am proud to be running to continue to represent Orange and Caswell counties, adding Person counties. I hope that I have done what I need to do to build relationships with this community over the 8 years that I've been in service and the 16 years that I worked in the public schools. And I hope that you believe that I can represent you well in the North Carolina Senate. I'm proud to have endorsement from organizations including Equality North Carolina, North Carolina Asian Americans Together, the AFL-CIO, the State Employees Association North Carolina, the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Pro-Choice North Carolina, Planned Parenthood. I hope I didn't forget any. But what I really want to close on is I had a conversation today with one of my students who went on to North Carolina A&T and is now kind of trying to figure out what he wants to do afterwards. And he's got big plans, big ideas. And it was really fun to talk to him about what he thinks we should be working on. And he wants to get involved. And he asked me, as we were having this conversation, mostly by text, about what my goals are. And he was kind of asking me, like, what are you going to do next? I'm like, I'm running for Senate. I'm not shooting to do anything next. But here, I want to read you just something I sent him and then what he said back. I said, I'm driven by service rather than goals, by trying to determine my highest best purpose. Yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean chasing higher office. I've always found that service is best defined through my efforts to look around me rather than to look up. And he responded, thank you for modeling this while I was growing up as part of the Blue Ribbon Mentoring Program. I agree with this, and anyone from the community that knows me would probably agree. These words are reflected in my character. If it wasn't for that support, if it wasn't for that model, the support from Chapel Hill Schools, Blue Ribbon, my family, and sheer determination, there's no telling where I would be. And if I can have an impact on young people like that and continue to help raise them to have a focus on service, that's what I want to do. And if I can model that in the state Senate, I would be honored to do that on your behalf. And if I'm not in the state Senate, I'm going to keep on doing that and trying to raise our strong young people of the next generation. Thanks for having me. And I really look forward to talking more throughout the campaign and afterwards. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative Meyer. Representative Holcomb, go ahead.
Thank you for that promotion on my title. That was great.
It's
okay. It's okay.
I'm forgetting which thing I'm dealing with.
Thank you. And thank you all for having us here today. It's really, really nice when we have opportunities like this to engage and talk and really answer questions, and kind of meet you. I'm looking forward. Every time I think that we're all going to get to be able to be together normally again, I see COVID numbers surging again, and then I start to sweat. But I do appreciate nights like this, and I am glad to get to spend time with y'all. And I hope that I am able to bring my kind of unusual life experience as an organic farmer, as a chef who brings a diverse group of people to tables all over the country, and as a child care advocate and early childhood education advocate at Kidzu. I hope I'm able to bring all that to the table and help move North Carolina forward. I don't think there's a single legislative issue that'll be a magical cure. I mean, as someone who was raised in the North Carolina public school teacher and the daughter of a school teacher, I want us to be a state where all of our schools, no matter where they are, have the best resources and facilities. I want all of our teachers and our support staff to be paid better. I want to see Medicaid expansion passed. I want to ensure universal equitable access to healthcare. I want education at every age from birth until, retraining just before death, if possible. I want equal pay for everyone. I want access to abortion rights, and I want guaranteed paid parental leave for all parents, regardless of how they made their families. And I actually think that we can look to the bright spots in North Carolina's progressive history to build a roadmap to an even more progressive future. And I look forward to working with all of you and people like you across North Carolina to do that. Thank you seriously again for having me here tonight.
All right. Thank you, Ms. DeMent Holcomb. And thank you to both candidates for being willing to go through this on a Thursday and talk with us about your policy positions and go more in depth. It's one of the hallmarks of being a progressive is wanting to talk more in depth about the policies, at least in my opinion. But thank you both very much for coming out and engaging with us. And I will pass it back over to Rebecca for anything else for the caucus.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. You did a great job too. Thank you so much for that. And yes, thanks to our candidates. And Greg, I'm very glad you were excited about the healthcare question. Of course, that came from me. Because hopefully we will get Medicaid expansion before the general election. That would be amazing. But I'm fighting for it. Thank you everyone for joining us, not just for this candidate forum, but for the other candidate forums that we've had. Really appreciate it and your support. Please go out and vote. Early voting starts on the 28th of April. May 17th is election day. We are going to be doing our endorsements, so really keep a lookout for that. And we'd love for you to vote on our choices, who we want to endorse. And the last thing I'll say is just next month, our meeting is later on. It'll be after the primary. It's Thursday, May 26th, and it's actually going to be focused. It'll be a panel on labor. We are in a union moment, which is very exciting. And I work at a place that has a union, and I know that it's definitely helped us get the benefit, like really great benefits. And so we are in a really amazing moment. We're going to hear from labor leaders across the state talking about how we can continue that momentum and what it means to sort of be part of a union. So please keep a lookout for that. That won't be until after. I know there's lots to do before then, and we have the elections. But thank you to everyone for tuning in, and I hope you have a great holiday weekend, and we will be seeing you all around. Thank you so much.